Welcome to the Decision Lab podcast, the sanctuary for wellness professionals like therapists, coaches, creators, and more who are looking to over-deliver to their clients.
We uncover the truth behind cutting-edge wellness products by going straight to the founder.
We use our backgrounds in neuroscience, chemical engineering, and marketing to ask the hard questions in order to eliminate bias, misinformation, and fancy marketing language.
Allowing you to make better wellness decisions and recommendations for yourself and your clients.
So if you're a leader in the health and wellness space, welcome. This podcast was designed for you.
Join us every week for interviews that will change how you think about wellness.
All right, people, welcome back. Today we are talking to one of my favorite guests, Dr. Mustafa. He is the Chief Science and Product Officer at Mendi, a neurotechnology startup from Sweden. Dr. Mustafa has experience in product management, software engineering, and academic research, and he has completed his PhD in neuroscience and biophysics, which I am pumped to talk more about. He drives integration in advanced neuroscience, behavioral design, and AI into innovative brain health solutions, aiming to make neurotechnology more accessible to those through products like Neurofeedback headband, which empowers individuals to train their brains and unlock cognitive potential. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Mustafa.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Pumped to have you. We love talking with PhDs because we can go deep. So we'll get there. But before we do, a couple questions we like to ask to get to know people that generally throw people off are, if I was talking to your mom or dad, what 3 words would they use to describe you? Yeah, wasn't ready.
I would say difficult. I would say ambitious and very stubborn.
Nice.
I would love to throw in loving in there too, but let's just go for the ones I've heard the most.
There you go. How have those helped you throughout your life, though? Those 3 characteristics.
I think the stubbornness I really got it from my father primarily. I think I'm not really stubborn to a fault. I think it's a matter of just really sticking with it until if you start something, you're really, stubborn enough to see it through. And I just have really difficulties giving up. So I think it's served me both well and in some instances not so well. So I think I really, looking back at it, I really can't sort of mention specific instances where it went bad, went good, but I think in the grander scheme of things, it worked in my favor. Yeah.
Hey, those aren't bad things to have as a founder. So that's great. I love to hear that.
I'm not a founder though, but maybe in the future someday.
Fair enough. Helping run a company at least. So what about if I knew you in middle school, would I have known you'd be here?
Probably not. No.
Ooh. Tell me more.
I actually was. Oh God, I don't know. There's gonna be that. No, I was actually a little bit of a slacker, and honestly, I got where I am today because I stumbled into much of it. I don't think I've ever had a plan for anything.
Wow.
Yeah, no, really. It's. I think how I ended up in neuroscience, for instance, it's not because I had a plan. It's I stumbled into it. I did my bachelor in pharmacokinetics and toxicology, and I was really, like I said, I was slacking, and I was assigned a project that I didn't even apply for. Ended my bachelor and ended up to be in neuroscience. And after that, I just, I sort of fell in love with it and continued onward. And then a PhD was exactly the same thing as well. It's really just went with the flow, I would say, just to summarize it. I never really had a plan.
Wow. You don't hear that much from someone who's a PhD in neuroscience often. What was the initial thing in your bachelor? What was the project that sparked the interest?
The project was with Professor Marlene Bartow. She's an incredible German neuroscientist, and the project was using electrophysiology to measure neural activity from interneurons, so the inhibitory interneurons in the brain. And I've never came across electrophysiology where you use electrodes and amplifiers to really, visualize currents and voltages from the neuron itself. So we use glass electrodes, and we more or less puncture the neuron membrane and measure the voltage and the currents, the neural activity, basically. So it's usually it is in voltage. And yeah, it was something I'd really never came across before, and it was really difficult in the beginning, but I sort of fell in love with it. And I continued on to doing a PhD and a master's in experimental neuroscience because I love the sort of the interdisciplinary approach to it, which is computational data modeling, immunohistochemistry, and neuroscience. So it's I think that the appealing part of it was actually the multidisciplinary approach to my research, at least.
From that whole experience, what were some of like the coolest things that you learned or anything that was really surprising about the brain?
I think the coolest experiments I've done during my PhD was the last paper, which is actually in review in the journal Neuron Journal. And we studied actually the human neurons. So, we in research, especially in neuroscience, the one I did, I worked on rats and rodents in general, so rats and mice, because the brain structure is very similar to the humans and higher primates. And we got an opportunity to actually, I did my PhD in Amsterdam, and we got an opportunity to get human tissue from epilepsy patients undergoing neurosurgery. So to get access to deeper structure in the brain, they would excise about 1 cubic centimeter of their temporal cortex, and we will get those and sort of dissect them and be able to run experiments on them. So that's the closest thing I got to an actually healthy human neurons. And we ran experiments comparing them to rats. And we were basically looking at the biophysics of those two neurons from two different species. I think these were the coolest experiments I've done before. So I think I would say that was the highlight of my PhD with my then supervisor, Martin Kohler.
It's so cool. Biophysics is something that I don't think most people would understand. We're generally talking to the general consumer. So could you explain biophysics and kind of how it connects to neuroscience?
So in the context of biophysics, so it's a very broad type of it's a very broad field, right? For instance, people researching protein structures, for instance, that's still biophysics, for instance. In our case, we were looking at the sort of the dynamics of and the behavior of ion channels in the membrane of neurons. And what we would do, we would run experiments, for instance, live experiments on living tissues, and then we'd collect that data and we would build a model, a biophysical model, if you will, of the neuron. And then we run simulations on it. To do that, to be able to do that, you need to understand the biophysics of the neuron. And that is that's the sodium channels, the potassium channels, the calcium channels that basically that are imbued in the membrane of the neuron and that give rise to its activity, its electrical activities. And in that scope, this is what biophysics was for us as well, basically. But it's a very broad field. But understanding the biophysics of individual neurons, you'll be able to understand the larger collection of neurons, because your brain has billions, hundreds of billions of neurons, and 80 billion neurons or so.
86, yeah.
Exactly. And then understanding the individual neurons and how they behave and their biophysical properties, for instance, their membranes, how they behave, because you can really reduce a neuron into a battery, right? It has a resistor, and it has a capacitor. So the neurons can be a resistor and a capacitor. It's an RC circuit, a resistor capacitor circuit. So yeah, I would say just in broad strokes, that's what biophysics is in the case of neurons.
So it's taking what biologically a neuron is doing, or what the best that we know, turning that into some type of computational model that can be represented outside of like an actual human brain, so that you can run tons more experiments on it.
Exactly. It's an basically it's an approximation of reality. Every computer model is an approximation. So the Human Brain Project, for instance, it's running large, huge simulations of neurons. That is all based on data generated experimentally. And then you basically be able to approximate that into sort of an abstract model.
Wow, that is badass. One of the coolest PhDs I've heard of in a long time. That's the technical term. I'd love to understand, if we extrapolate this a little bit more in relation to, and this actually might be an interesting question to ask you, like the separation between the mind, brain, and body, but in relation to your own mental health and your mental and emotional health journey. what struggles have you had along your path and things like that in relation to mental health and some of the things that Mendi helps people with?
I think personally, like many academics, I think anxiety and stress is very prevalent in that field because you're overworked and you work long hours. It's a very cutthroat field as well. You've probably heard this publish or perish type of pressure
Yeah.
that you have, and you work sort of grant to grant. It's almost like
Yeah.
paycheck to paycheck, and there's always a lot of pressure, and it's a pretty big community. And I can tell you that in the paper that's currently in review, we already got scooped twice. So things happen really, really quickly, and people, produce papers, and you feel like, oh, crap, the novelty of my work is sort of losing its edge, and then we have to, improve it or come up with something new. So I think
Oof.
that pressure itself and really takes a mental toll on you. I myself actually experienced burnout at the end of my PhD, and really, I think it continued as a pretty severe anxiety, I would say, um, that I struggled with for about, half a year. So I think I have sort of a first row seat to these having first hand experience and really knowing what's it like to have to be under pressure and under a long period of time, and that eventually manifests itself into a burnout because you in the moment you feel like you can really handle the pressure, and in your 20s you feel like you're invincible, uh, and then I think your body keep counts, so that the effects of stress doesn't show up in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, sometimes a year or 2 years later. That's when you really start seeing the damage that stress does to your body. It really erodes it from the inside. So I think, early awareness of one's limitation and awareness of the fact that, look, you're just tissue and bone, and, you're just human. I mean, you're an organism. There's limitation to what you can do and how much stress you can put on your body before it start to crack. You hear it, you never think it's going to happen to you, but sometimes you have to learn it the hard way.
How did you overcome that stress and that burnout?
So I had to really take a step back from everything, even my phone. I had to get a really dumb phone to basically, primarily because I just did not want to have a contact with anyone. And I had to, of course, I went to therapy.
Yeah.
And I think people, it's really, no, full disclosure, I used to mock that, to be honest, until I undergone it myself and realized how powerful it is. And of course, like with therapy, you've probably heard this yourself, it's really hard to find a really good therapist. You have to go through several. And I think a lot of it was, understanding exactly why that happened in the first place and really trace back to why was I so committed to working long hours? Why was it so important to be trying to be the best at what you do? Why would you burn the midnight oil? And that really sort of took us back to my childhood. I think I was under a lot of pressure to you have a pressure from your family, you have a pressure from your peers, and especially when you go to a school with driven individuals or siblings and so on. The environment itself really conditioned you to basically just have at it and always be the best. It sort of paints the world in a very Darwinian way. Because and I have a friend of mine actually asked me, she said, I remember, we both went to university together, and that's before my PhD. And she asked me, "So why is it so important for you to get an A plus?" I really didn't have an answer for it. I said, I want to. But he said, yeah, okay, I get it. But why? Like, what would happen if you got a B plus instead of an A plus? You're still going to go exactly where you wanted to go. But why is this so important? Why is this little, yeah, didn't really have an answer for it. I think it's sort of a combination of this long-term conditioning that I think really turns into an ugly habit later in life, and well, uh, turned into a burnout for me. So
Do you have now, I mean, as a neuroscientist, do you have 3 tips for people who are dealing with stress? Like, how would you combat stress as a neuroscientist?
I can only speak for my own. I mean, there's How to combat stress is really not, I mean, there's no solution that fits all, right? I don't think there's, people are different. Your conditions are different. Your environment is very different. I would say the thing that made a huge difference for me is sleep. Is
Mm,
not to skip on sleep. I would rather lose money than lose sleep. So
yes.
I think it's really has changed because lack of sleep is really accelerate the aging process. It ruins your hormonal balance, literally shrinks your gray matter. It's that sort of incredible part of being human that you really, I feel like we need to guard it at all costs. That this is something that we need to prioritize above all else because this is the time when your body sort of takes a break and recuperate, right? Takes it easy because during the day you have these, you have triggers, you have stress episodes, you eat junk food, you take stimulants left and right. So I would think just if I were to give one thing that, of course, it's not I wouldn't call it the only solution, but I think sleep and exercise. And I recently got into cold exposure therapy.
Hey,
So I think that, oh my God, that has been a game changer for my sleep. It really, I can see, so I use Aura Ring. I can see basically
nice.
how when I started this, yeah, 3 weeks in, of basically taking 1 minute cold exposure therapy, an hour and a half before bed, I slip into deep sleep like a baby. So I think it's, but also you have to, avoid the triggers. I mean, whatever's stressing you out, you have to address that. Either, whatever it is, I cannot really give you a certain, for me, for instance, I've learned not to catastrophize everything.
Oof.
Yeah, that's
I
I,
huge.
see that
I
one all the
really,
time in anxious
yeah,
achievers.
exactly. Exactly. It's, things are not as bad as they appear to be. So I think it's this rumination and catastrophize everything and overthinking it. And I really noticed that every time, there's a trigger or I see something and I can see my heart rate really going up. And I keep asking myself, is this really worth it? Like, why am I already jumping the gun and creating events that has not really happened yet? So I think it's I don't really think that you always need a therapist for this to help you see this, but I think really try not to be mindful of what's triggering you, but also ask yourself, is this really as bad as it looks? I think that
Yeah.
that personally help is not catastrophizing everything. I think that's yeah, start there somewhere.
Perspective is everything.
I love it. I just made a piece of content about a worry window for people to catastrophize and ruminate and worry in a specific 10-minute window, and that's in their day. And it's really, really helpful
Yep.
to kind of combat catastrophizing and overthinking and worrying and stuff. So it's funny that you mentioned that uh, on the pod today. So that's cool. How does this anxious, achieving, burnt out PhD land in Mendi?
So yeah, when I transitioned from academia to tech, before Mendi, I was working in medtech as a software engineer, working for a Swedish company that digitalized workflows for elderly care. It was a great company, amazing team, and so on. But I also felt, one of the reasons I transitioned away from academia is because I felt like I was, wearing myself down, and I needed, to step away from it a little bit. And I got into medtech, but I soon realized that, I've spent about 12, 13, years in school to become to where I am today. And I just didn't feel like I wanted to give that up. I still want to use my background in
Hmm.
neuroscience and psychology and be able to basically, bring that into my work. And honestly, just, one evening I just searched online for I couldn't sleep, and I just went on Google and typed neurotech company in Sweden, and then Mendi came on top. And
No
I just basically
way.
content and really, yeah, really. I mean, this is. I really wish I was more inspirational and having like a grandiose story. I don't. I
No,
really
that's
don't. I
awesome.
basically just I looked it up and I found it, and yeah, I contacted them, and one thing led to another, and I ended up to at Mendi, and I love we have an incredible team, an incredible board, and I feel fortunate to really be part of this mission that we're trying to achieve, and I'll be able to sort of, balance this hybrid role of product and science. So I think it's yeah, and sorry, just another very ordinary story
Dude,
into where I am, but this is, yeah,
it's your
No, I,
story, bro. That means it's extraordinary, my friend. That's awesome.
I
Like, and
appreciate
it
it.
probably represents the average person more than some crazy Steve Jobs, Elon Musk thing anyway. So that's awesome.
exactly.
I love that. What's could you tell people what Mendi is in like a sentence, and then kind of what your role and what you do is there?
Yeah, so Mendi is like you introduced at the start. Mendi is a Swedish neurotech startup. Yeah, exactly. Well, the Mendi headband here. Exactly. So Mendi is a neurotech startup started in 2018. And what Mendi is a brain training tool, right? So what Mendi does, we use a technique called neurofeedback. And what neurofeedback is a technique where you present the user in real time their brain activity and help them to train the brain to self-regulate better. So a Mendi device looks something like this, something they wear on your forehead, and we use a technology called fNIRS. So that's functional near-infrared spectroscopy. It's a mouthful, but it's very simple. And what it means is basically it measures the oxygenation in your prefrontal cortex because you wear it just right on your forehead. And it measures the oxygenation to prefrontal cortex in response to neural activation. So what Mendi does, so it comes with an app and you wear the device and it start measuring your brain activity and it feeds it back into the app in a gamified format. So what we try to do with Mendi is we gamified this technique called neurofeedback to help you train your focus, your attention. And the reason that we wanted to focus on the prefrontal cortex is because the frontal lobe is the last part of the brain that develops. That this is the part of the brain that is more complex that imbues human beings with this higher cognitive functions, and it is the seat of the executive function. That's decision making, emotion regulation, focus, sustained attention, inhibition, you name it. Everything that is you use during your day, your waking hours, it's situated right there. So training your prefrontal cortex and training your executive function has a ripple effect onto your life, right? Be able to focus. I mean, just imagine be able to focus or improve your focus in general. We're all distracted. I'm pretty sure you are. We're all multitasking. And
Yeah.
the more we multitask, the more we stretch our cognitive bandwidth. And what that does, basically, it actually contributes to stress because if you cannot focus, you're not as productive. You don't deliver as high quality as you think you do. You think I can juggle three things at the same time, but neurologically that's impossible. The brain is wired to be a serial processor. You will never be able to multi-thread, so to speak, in your brain. It's only one process at a time. You can switch between the two of them, but very few have this talent to do it. The rest of us, we're basically really trying.
Yeah,
And
switchers.
yeah, exactly. So when you're switching tasks, it actually also stresses you out. And when you get
Mm.
stressed, you develop anxiety and so on. So it's really has a knock-on effect. This lack of attention, being able not be easily distracted, has a knock-on effect onto the rest of your mental faculties. But Mendi, our mission is to improve focus and well-being globally by democratizing the access to innovative brain health tools. And I think Mendi journey. Talk a little bit about Mendi. Mendi journey began with a really simple yet powerful idea. Again, like I said, make professional grade neurofeedback accessible to everyone, anytime, anywhere. We want to bring technology to people instead of bringing people to technology. And the company has seen an incredible success when it was founded. I think 10,000 devices were sold. Well, I'm sorry, devices were ordered and 3 million raised through crowdfunding. But for Mendi, that was just the beginning of the journey. We want to, as we look ahead, our future, we want to become a key player and sort of revolutionizing yeah, global mental health, basically. And we want to empower individuals, but also not just reaching certain individuals, but also organizations with accessible brain health tools to address these mental health challenges before it escalates, and unlock people's productivity and do that at a larger scale too.
So we
So this is,
interviewed the founder of Muse on here as well, and they use something different to measure brain activity, not
yeah,
fNIRS, right? They use
yeah,
ECG. what could you help break down what, because you kind of breeze past the super unique thing, because I've tested a ton of these and you're the only one that has ever
Yeah.
used fNIRS. So could you please break that down a little bit more and help people understand what fNIRS is, how it works, how it's different from Muse and other feedback devices?
Yeah, so what Mendi, like I said, Mendi uses fNIRS, which is functional near infrared spectroscopy. So we measure blood flow and we measure the oxygenation levels to the prefrontal cortex. So what happens is when you engage your prefrontal cortex, either through problem solving or, well, any activity that is mentally tasking, for instance, what happens is that when the neural networks get activated, they create something called like a metabolic deficit. You consume oxygen, nutrients, everything in that area, and what that happens is that the brain increases blood flow to the air to sustain this neural activity. And this is what we measure. It's very similar to fMRI. With EEG, for instance, what EEG measures is the electrical activity. So with Mendi, we measure oxygenation as a proxy for neural activity. We don't approximate or anything, but it's basically it has a one-to-one relationship. It's called a neurovascular coupling, where there's neural activity, there's increase in oxygenation. EEG, on the other hand, it measures directly the electrical activity of an ensemble of neurons. So when they fire at the same frequency, the signal amplifies to a level where it's detected from outside the brain. So this is what EEG does. But EEG has also its limitation, right? It's very prone to motion. It's very data intensive, but also the electrical activity of the brain is so noisy. There is always a high risk of false positives, false negatives, and also the electrodes have to have to be in contact with the skin at all times. Any movement can basically affect the baseline. With fNIRS, on the other hand, for instance, of course, all technologies have their limitations. As a scientist, I cannot say one is better than the other. It depends on what you're using it for and to what case and in what settings. But fNIRS is less prone to basically these artifacts that EEG is prone to. But at the same time, EEG also operates at a very short time domain, so you can capture events that happen on millisecond scale. Whereas fNIRS, because we measure the blood flow, the oxygenation, that happens on a 2 or 3 seconds time frame. So we capture the slow events over a long period of time. When we can capture mental, basically, we'll be able to, like, long-term monitoring with fNIRS basically is more suitable for detecting mental fatigue, working mental workload, for instance, and these long-term events, mental events. fNIRS is more suitable for that. And so that's basically in essence what the difference is between the two. I won't, I can't say one is better than the other. It depends what you use it for. But
Yeah.
I've worked with EEG before, and I know for a fact that it's very prone to noise. The data is very intensive. There's a lot of data you can capture, but it takes a lot of time to filter through it, to clean it, and also there's a risk of misinterpretation and finding false positives and false negatives. And of course that, it all depends on the software that you're using as well. So it's hard to, I would say, or to make a clear case one is better than the other. Like I said, it depends on what you use it for. So
Got it.
for Mendi, I think it's suitable for our basic mission statement is that we want to basically make this accessible. We make it Mendi is very lightweight. It's perfect for what we're trying to achieve, at least.
Thank you. So in relation to what you're trying to achieve, who's Mendi kind of made for? Who's it perfect for? What's your ideal customer, if you will?
I would say that our ideal customer is literally everyone. This is not something for a specific individual. I think, brain health and brain health management and proactive brain health management is something that we all should be engaged in. This is not something for one person to say, if you have this, then you should basically be using Mendi. Mendi is I would say this instead. So until recently, so effective and innovative technology, for instance, to improve well-being, like neurofeedback, has been sort of inaccessible to a lot of people. right? Most neurofeedback trainings and the clinics that you found those type of treatments on the neurotherapies in clinics, and people have to go there and you have an instructor walk you through everything. But again, it was inaccessible to a lot of people. And those who goes to these kind of clinics either have, for instance, anxiety conditions, depression, suffer from ADHD, for instance, or have some type of mental condition. But also they're, using Mendi to improve your focus or your attention, that it doesn't necessarily mean that there's having to be something quote unquote wrong with you to use Mendi. For the same reason, you don't have to be, for instance, going to the gym, right? That doesn't have to be something wrong with you for you to go to the gym, right? You're just taking care of yourself. Exactly. So if you need to, to age gracefully, for instance, you need to exercise. So you go to the gym for that. You hedge against, injuries in the future. And the same thing with neurofeedback. Our user base, we have over 38,000 users, and the majority of them, a lot of them, I wouldn't say the majority of them, but some of them have, use Mendi for stress management. They use it for anxiety management. Some of them have depression. Otherwise, ordered it for ADHD, for instance, management. So we've seen some of our users who reported that when they use Mendi, they feel like they have a better inhibition. So it's a way to increase their inhibition. And there are studies as well that's been shown, done in clinics, where neurofeedback has been shown to actually improve inhibition in ADHD patients. And that is something, it's one of the hallmarks of ADHD. It's that you're constantly distracted, you're switching tasks all the time, you're fidgety and so on. But I would say, and what we want to achieve in Mendi is really to make this accessible to literally everyone, because I think, and maybe this is a bit controversial, but I think all our brains are more or less dysregulated, and I think using neurofeedback help us to gain more agency over our brain health and be train our brain to be more regulated, so to speak.
Preaching to the choir over here.
One question that sorry, one question that I have is, what is like the user experience like? So,
Yeah.
I struggle with focus. I put the Mendi headband on. Then what happens? Like, how does it help me with focus? What do I do when I have the headband on?
So that's a great question. When you put the Mendi headband on and you start the app itself, it will walk you through. So when you first sign up, it will walk you through onboarding. You choose your goal, for instance, the main distractions, and then when you start the game itself, the game starts by basically first you have to report your emotion, your mood, but also your emotion. We need to understand how you're feeling, and we always recommend to our users to do a breathing exercise. Neurofeedback is a type of skill acquisition. It's a learning process. It's very akin to procedure learning, right? So procedure learning is when you do something without even thinking about it. It's something that is, when you read, for instance, that's more or less procedure learning. You don't, when you speak English, you don't retrieve English and speak it. You just do it. So you don't think about this. Right. So neurofeedback, we want the user, for instance, to use cyclic sighing type of breathing exercise. And that is to bring, to reduce stress, anxiety, and also to try to, lower your heart rate down to its, resting heart rate levels before you do a Mendi session. What we try to do at Mendi is to digitally approximate the experience that you have in a clinic, but in a digital format. And that's the only way to, make it more accessible. So, we're sort of removing the practitioner from the equation and just basically bringing that technology. So it ends up in the game. You start the game, and what you see, there's a ball rolling, and you can see that game as an oscilloscope of exactly what is happening in your prefrontal cortex, right? When the ball goes up, that means blood flow is going up to your prefrontal cortex. Now, here comes the tricky part, right? And when we tell our users, what we instruct them to do is to commit to concentration. So our game is in something called upregulation or feedback. We upregulate the brain activity in the prefrontal cortex. Now, here's the tricky part. When I tell someone commit to concentration, and they say, well, how do I do that? And this is where it becomes a little bit challenging, because how we experience concentration, how we experience sustained attention is very subjective. There is no, do this and you'll be able to focus. But what we try to do to tell our users is that, you have the ball rolling and try to shut out all type of distractions and focus on getting the ball to move up. You can either do that by basically, having a type of open focus mode, or try to basically focus on a certain, basically staring at the ball. And the thing is, you can see what's happening in real time. So whatever strategy that you're trying, the game will tell you that you're doing something right or you're doing something wrong, right? So if the ball
I can
goes down,
hear
it
the
means that you're
pinging
sort of,
as you're describing it right now, because it
yeah,
like
exactly.
ping, pa-ping, pa-ping
Yeah,
as you're playing the
yeah,
game. Like I
exactly.
could hear it as you're describing it.
Exactly. So when the ball goes up, right? That's is basically telling you that whatever you're doing, keep doing that. And we've added a positive reinforcement, sort of top of operant conditioning, is that when the ball goes up, you get these stars to tell you, keep doing this. And of course, the journey is not really, when you switch on your focus, it's not linear. It's not an on and off switch and it just goes upward, right? It's the learning process. So the ball will go down and then up and then go down and sometimes continues upward for a long period of time and then drops again. But this is how human focus or attention is. It's a coalescence. It's not an on and off switch. There are a lot of parts that have to come into play before you can actually achieve complete focus. And I think it's the same thing that describing focus as an ebb and flow constantly, because you know sustaining attention, sustaining stable neural activity is metabolically really, really expensive. So the brain would prefer not to do that. We have not evolved to focus for 4 hours straight. It will cause mental fatigue. So even
Huh.
even the same thing with chess players, for instance. I think if I'm not wrong, there was this study that shows their work, the sort of the mental workload sort of drop, it amps up to the point where they move the chess piece and then it drops again, right? And there's a really cool book by a Scottish chess master who describes focus and how it affected his life. He's a chess player, and a chess master, and he really describes focus in probably in the best way that I've heard, read it being described by someone who's not a neuroscientist, and he describes it like it's a form of coalescence. That a lot of stuff have to come together before you can focus, not an on and off switch. Because to be able to focus, you also be able to avoid distractions.
Wow.
And I would recommend I can't remember the book, but it's I recommend it to my colleagues. So this is to go back to the game. This is the process. If after you finish the game, you can see that your the trajectory of the ball is very, up and down. It's very jittery. But over time, with neurofeedback, because it's a learning process, you have to stick to it. Consistency is really important here. You have to stick to it. And over time, it becomes much easier for you to really control the trajectory of the ball. So once you do that, the next part is it's a generalization effect. So when you train your focus in the game itself, that effect becomes generalized into basically outside the game itself because you find yourself be able to focus better without having to look at a ball or have anything measured. Like when you're sitting at work, you feel like you can actually summon your focus easier because you train to do that in the game as well. And having improved focus, for instance, having an improved prefrontal cortex and having a well-trained executive function, for instance, plays a huge role because the brain doesn't, the brains are not like Lego parts where this is focus, this is emotion regulation, this is, they all play with one another. Basically, this is basically it's an orchestra. It's not just one fiddlers playing on their own. It's the same thing with this the paper by Gross 1998. I think he this concept of emotion regulation. He talks about how you need a well-functioning executive function to develop coping mechanisms for trauma, for stress, for whatever, because for instance, when there is a event or a situation unfolding, and you have this stream of information, you're capturing a stream of information from that situation. Some of them might be, contradicting. You need your sort of your pragmatic brain, your logical part of your brain, to be able to process that and filter out information as well. And to do that, you need to have a well-functioning, executive function. It's sort of the what do you call this? The person at a rail yard, the one who pulls all the levers,
Conductor?
and not the conductor, the person who basically decides where the trains are going to be parked. Sort of,
No.
it's a switch yard, sort of a switch yard, basically. That's one way to approximate the executive function or the prefrontal cortex. And to have a well-functioning prefrontal cortex helps you not just with focus; it helps you with develop better mental guardrails, handling stress better as well. And it has
So
this sort of spillover effect too. Yeah, sorry.
Something I'm curious about that we love to dive into. We talked about this beforehand. Is we talked about there's this generalizability effect. There's neurofeedback does this, Mendi does that. Like, help us understand what research has been done on what things specifically, and like what we know so far, what we know, like what research says. Like, is there a generalizing effect? Is there not? Is that with Mendi? Is that normal neurofeedback? Like, help break some of that stuff down that we were talking about before we hopped on the pod.
Yeah, so I think neurofeedback. It's like we mentioned before the podcast. There is a lot of there's a lot of research being done on neurofeedback. It's not a new technique that came out yesterday. It's been around for decades, but I think it's hard to pinpoint one type of study that explains the entire that explains the entire technique itself. For instance, there are studies that's been shown, like I said, it's been shown where they use neurofeedback for, I think, in children between the age of 9 and 13, for instance, to help them with ADHD. And there's been shown also with older adults, for instance, to help them with cognitive impairments, to manage basically like mild cognitive impairments. That's been shown also for autism. It's been shown for anxiety conditions and depression. One of the challenges, and this is how research works, right? There's no one paper that would decide that this is valid and this is invalid, but rather it builds over time. And this is how research works. And one of the reasons for the discrepancy, and I can say this with confidence, it's not because of the technique, it's because the standardization to be able to reproduce effects is not there yet.
What do you mean by
each
that?
group, meaning that so for instance, going back to my PhD, for instance, when we use electrophysiology techniques to measure electrical activity from neurons, there are certain standards that we have to follow to get the best optimal signal. For instance, how we analyze the data, how we basically filter, what type of filters we use. With neurofeedback is that there's still not a very clear type of sort of standard across the board for how to use neurofeedback in clinics or how to use it in the naturalistic environment. Therefore, it is our responsibility for any company, for instance, that develop these wearables, that we validate our work, and we validate it for our users and for our user segments and who we're targeting as well. And I think it's really comes down to the lack of standardization between in the research community that has led to where some papers or some research shows that there is actually an increase that shows an effect, and other ones show there is a sort of a minor effect, the effect size is not as big. And I think this is what it really comes down to. But for us, what we try to do at Mendi is that our approach to neurofeedback, again, we were talking about this earlier, it's science-backed. We use the latest, basically, technology. Our sensors are, we've run, for instance, signal validation studies that shows our sensors are on par, that collect the data with such high precision that is very similar to clinical grade type of equipment. And
wow.
Yeah, we use the scientific method to basically validate everything that we do, because we have to hold ourselves to this type of standard and not just say, well, someone out there used it, therefore it would work for us. That's not really how it works. We conduct our own research and we try to deliver the best possible outcome for our users.
And so what's some of that look like? I know previously you were talking about some research partners that you're working with. Like, how do you do your own research? How do you keep it not biased? How do you keep bias out of it? How do you keep like, oh, Mendi paid for this, and all of a sudden this research says that Mendi is great? Of course, like how do you prevent that kind of stuff? And like, how do you think about this as a scientist first?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So, for instance, Mendi does not. So we work with, for instance, with the University of Victoria, Professor Olaf Krigelsen of the University of Victoria. They use Mendi to measure cognitive load in a subject, for instance. We do not pay for that research. Mendi does not pay for the research. We provide the data, we provide the hardware, but we sort of, it's hands off. And because we want to maintain the scientific integrity, that we don't even analyze the data either. And for that study, for instance, this is the type of approach that we have. But for all other study, we partner with the universities. We don't pay for the research itself. And anything from data collection to data analysis is all collected and analyzed by these researchers. And our involvement is restricted to providing the hardware, and providing any type of technical assistance to them.
Got it.
And this is how we
Okay.
sort of keep ourselves, out of it as much as possible. And even if you were to pay for research, let's say clinical research, for instance, there are guardrails that have to put in place. I mean, there's this, that we make sure that ensures that we are not involved in this research, and also the whole peer-reviewed process will ensure that too. We have no leverage or influence over academics or researchers. So this is the type of approach that we're conducting right now when it
Love to
comes to
hear it. So,
research.
what have been some of the results or things that you would be willing to claim or suggest that Mendi could help with that do have some level of clinical validation or research behind them or science-backed type things that you could suggest?
So the type of neurofeedback that the upregulation neurofeedback that we've designed in the app itself is, and when we surveyed our users and we've interviewed our users, for instance, and what we found is that it is very much in line with what the literature is also showing. Like I said, we have a huge user base and it's growing monthly, and we're projected to really grow that user base to to significantly next year. But what we've seen is that our users have the ones that reported, who have bought Mendi, for instance, for increasing their focus or increasing their sort of attention span. We've seen this, and again, this is sort of qualitative data. This is self-reported data from our users, but we've seen that it helps them with, with some conditions, some level of anxiety, for instance. Some of them with stress management. Some of them feel like they're, they have easier time to focus or really be able to concentrate on tasks, for instance. Those who bought Mendi for their children who have ADHD, those who bought it for themselves who have ADD-like conditions, again, feel like Mendi is really helping them with increased inhibition, for instance. And there have been studies shown with both EEG and fNIRS where it shows that that type of intervention does actually increase the level of inhibition. Of course, ADHD, look, ADHD, if you're clinically diagnosed ADHD, it's a congenital condition. There's nothing that will reverse that, whether it's medication or any other approach. But to be able, even if we're, let's say, hypothetically, the effect size and, 10% increase in inhibition, that's a huge quality of life bump for those individuals. And if we've managed to help that one person, that's a win for us. So that's from our users, for instance. But we're also working with the university, like the University of George Fox University. They're testing Mendi to incorporate that into larger clinical studies, for instance. So they ran a smaller pilot study with students and college students, for instance. Keep in mind that science and research is slow. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of hoops that we have to jump through, ethical and logistical and financial, for instance, and also to find researchers who have the time to work with us. But also, before we start any larger validation, it's easier for people to come in and say, hey, why haven't you done a 200 person RCT study?
Yeah.
Well, to be able to do that, we have to run a pilot study first. We have to measure the effect size first before we run the power analysis to be able to understand how many participants we need for larger studies. I don't really, this is, for us, it's not a matter of sort of, avoiding answering these questions. We're taking it the way research works. We run pilot studies, we measure effect size, we use that preliminary data to be able to inform larger studies. And again, these things take time. I can give you an example, for instance. We work with Temple University in Philadelphia. And, neurofeedback has also been shown to be used in cognitive enhancement in athletes, for instance. And any sports that requires, sustained attention, any, reaction time, be able to, pattern recognition during a certain, game, for instance, that's all being carried out by the hodgepodge of neurons in the prefrontal cortex. So with Temple University, we are actually very close to start running a study with their fencing team and to use Mendi interventions. So that we use Mendi basically for 10 minutes before their physical exercise over a period of 30 days. So that we use it every single day, 5 times a week, 10 minutes. And then we would do basically pre and post type of, self-report surveys, such as the attention control scale, which measures attention, but also how well you can shift your attention, how you can switch between different modes, for instance. And we run this study because we are planning a larger study next year, but we run a smaller one to measure the effect size to inform the next larger study that we will be running as well. And this is how research works. So everything we do is we make sure there's evidence based. This is not just, we don't just make claims. Everything we do, we try to back it up by existing research out there that is similar to the type of neurofeedback that we're doing, but also we collect ourselves research by running these type of studies. Another study that we want to run is with Aspen Neuro. It's a clinic in Aspen, Colorado, and they open another clinic in Santa Monica. We're actually looking to work with Red Bull athletes, but also Nike athletes. And for this,
Nice.
It's a really interesting study because we're taking this to the next level where Mendi intervention, so we will do QEEG brain scans before and after the intervention, so we can actually see how the brain
Heck yeah.
how the brain map changes, whether the brain is actually more better regulated after 30 days of Mendi intervention. And I'm really particularly excited about this because working with athletes, it's so much easier than working with, is it okay to say normal people? But basically, because
Yeah.
because athletes, their bread and butter is hyper, it's peak performance. Anything that
Yep.
can help them be the best version of themselves, they will invest in it. So the buy-in to stick to the training is a much easier compared to others because in larger studies you have to account for the dropout. People not complying with the regime. But with athletes, we're really excited to work with these athletes. And the exciting part as well, especially with these athletes, is that they travel a lot. So this is a way for us to test how Mendi can be incorporated into their routine while they're having their busy life. It funnels into our vision of democratizing the access, but building a product that makes it easier for individuals to fit it, to basically make it habitual, make it fit into their daily routines. And in this case is athletes, right? Of course, we always, we will do the same thing with other segments as well. So yeah, go on, sorry.
One thing in relation to studies, we dove deep. Effect size, like the power analysis, the thing. Could you just explain how you think about that as a scientist? Like, what does it mean to study the effect size first and then do a power analysis with a deeper thing? Like, help people understand that. I don't think everybody would get that necessarily.
So with the effect size, we want to see the effect size is to measure what is the effect of the intervention, right? We need to understand because if the effect size is really, really small, that means you need a large cohort, right, for a larger study to be able to see it. If its effect size is really big, you will need to have to see it. You will not to have to, for instance, recruit. Let's say if it's really very, very small, for instance, then for the larger study, you probably would need, I would say, I don't know. I mean, 200, let's say. I'm throwing numbers out there. But if the effect size is big enough and is very noticeable, for instance, then you can run a larger study, but you will need to have to recruit that many people or not that many subjects. So in essence, this is it. This is what we want to measure the effect size for this group to be able to run a larger study. And we do this. This is not just with sort of that type of intervention research. For everything that we do, even when I work with neurons, before we launch a larger project and say there is something there to investigate, we first produce preliminary data, right? And we can see there is a trend. We can see there is an there's a trend. There is something there to look into. And if it's convincing enough, we basically turn it into a larger project. And this is exactly the same thing. The effect size, we want to see what is the effect of the intervention. And if it's really, really too small, then we go back to the drawing board and reassess the protocol. Maybe it's the protocol itself that we need to readjust to get a larger effect size, for instance. Maybe, for instance, give an example. A lot of our users who, when we interviewed them, when they switched from 3 minutes and 5 minutes neurofeedback sessions with Mendi, when they switch from those 3 to 5 minutes to 10 and 15 minutes, that's when they start saying that they actually start experiencing the benefits of neurofeedback. So this is something similar to imagine we run a pilot study on only 3 minutes per day, but the effect size is so tiny that it does not warrant a larger study. So we go back to the drawing board, reassess the protocol, and then run another one. And if we see, okay, it's when we bumped it up to 10 minutes, 5 times a week, that's when the effect size became more prominent. And that
Got
will
it.
inform the larger study itself.
So it lets you do more rapid iterations of like what could be the variable that is causing the effect or whatever. And when you say effect, just hypothetically that you like, let's pretend that you did a study with like 10 people. A large effect size would mean that 10 people use Mendi and 90% of them were like, this is awesome. It helped my focus. That's a large effect size. A small effect size would be 1 out of the 10, like 10% says that it helped my focus. Is that a super simplistic way to think about it?
You could, I mean, yeah, in some cases, yes, because let's say, for instance, if we see that, let's say you run a intervention studies, for instance, with Mendi for 1 month, and you do QEEG scans before and after, and we're looking at if the low beta power in the prefrontal cortex has, let's say, increased as a result of the intervention itself, for instance. If we see that increase, let's say, in 8 out of 10, that's pretty, big effect size, right? But that's on a so basically that's 8 out of 10 experiencing this. But then we can dig deeper and look at the power of low beta brainwaves itself. So that's also one way to measure it. A second one, also they have to report. So because neurofeedback, to measure the effects of neurofeedback interventions or any interventions, right? Self-report and subjective experience is just as important as using, let's say, cognitive assessments to measure, sort of objectively measure these improvements in cognitive faculties that it's not readily noticeable to the user. So if they report, for instance, using attention control scale, if they score, let's say 15, and then afterward they report they're scoring, let's say 30, for instance, that's a huge effect size. That's the self-reporting, the subjective experience is very, very big. So that's a huge effect size as well. So it takes on, it really takes on several forms, the effect size itself. So
it's interesting to
how you
hear
described
how
it
much,
is more or less, yeah.
It's interesting to hear how much groundwork needs to go into, because it is something we hear a lot from comments and users and people like that. They're like, oh, well, you don't have a randomized control trial, RCT, as we mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
But there's so many of these pilots and things that need to go into to build the groundwork for it to be worth it to invest in a randomized control trial and like the big gold standard, double-blind placebo, RCT, clinical trial, all this stuff. It's like, damn, there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be made up before a product can do this. And you have limited resources. Mendi doesn't have unlimited funds, doesn't have unlimited time.
It's very expensive. It's very, 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 very expensive. And it's a huge investment for the company to make as well. And we will make those investments, of course, but in due time, because we also have to prioritize, our operations, our manufacturing and product development itself, because it's making sure that the product and the intervention that we're developing is just as, it's ready for an intervention as well. Our product is ready for intervention, but this is a matter of just working our way to it and not sort of a reluctance on our part not to do it.
How do you balance the science communication? You're a hardcore scientist. It's very apparent, right? So, but you're also helping run a company that has to sell and ship units. You got to sell. So how do you, in your opinion, or like the way that you think about it at Mendi, or maybe the voice of reason you provide to the marketing team, whatever it is, how do you think about like communicating and selling versus science and how they blend?
So we have at Mendi, for instance, the product communication is not a one-man job, right? This is something, it's across departmental. So we have developed a framework within which we have to stick when we communicate in ads, when we communicate on websites, what we communicate on our social media, for instance. We cannot make overly definitive clinical claims, for instance. That's really, really important. Not only because we have to also stay true to our ethos that we are science-backed and we're not going to make claims that are not true, but also this is a matter of liability. You also have, I think in the US you have FCC, for instance, when it comes to if you make false claims. And without pointing fingers, I've seen some of our competitors making some really outlandish claims of their products. This is not something that we do. So we have a very clear map, a very clear documentation, and a framework within which the marketing team, that they know they have to work. Any creative assets for the ads have to be within that, and not sounding too negative. Not because you cannot communicate to people and say something wrong with your brain. Here's using Mendi, for instance.
Right.
When product development, we're selling a user experience, right? We're not just selling a utility. This is really important for us as well, because if we just switch for a bit from the science, when it comes to product development, for instance, when you buy a house, your first house, right? You're not really buying a structure and cement and a door and windows. You're buying a home. You're buying a life, right? This is the same approach that we have. We want to help you take better control of your brain health. A better brain health is a better life. So our mission isn't just to sell you a utility. Our mission is to really help you achieve that goal. Have a brain health, a better brain health, a method, a brain tool that can help you hedge against later onset of chronic depression or disease or any kind of mental condition. This is a way for you to train your brain. The same thing that the gym sells you confidence, sells you you feel better, you feel better about yourself, you look better, and you also this is something similar to this as well. I mean, this is we need to make sure that we're not making over definitive clinical claims, but even when it comes to, sorry, I'm jumping back and forth here, but because I love the setup that we have here. It's very sort of casual dialogue. Even when it comes to clinical studies, right? A study is an observation of a process. It's not a rule. No, really, this is how it works. And
That's a good point.
research is it's an observation, it's a quantification of a process that we may or may not be able to derive or abstract a general rule, right? Just because
Wow.
it is published doesn't necessarily mean that. I mean, there are so many published papers. I mean, I'm sure you guys know about this. You're both scientists, have been retracted. Look at the crisis psychology is suffering from, the reproducibility crisis. Some benchmark studies are not reproduced. No one can reproduce
Insane.
them. Why? No one really knows. So take that with a hint of salt. People, just because something is, and I say this as a scientist myself, just because something is, I myself, I remember there's one paper that was published. It was a really high impact paper. I tried everything humanly possible to reproduce one result in that paper, and I just couldn't do it.
Oof.
So what's the
Wow.
explanation there,
Jesus.
right? And
Yeah.
I followed their methodology, couldn't do it. I cannot tell you the months I spent trying to reproduce it because I want to use it for my own project. Just couldn't do it. So I think it's
Jesus.
it's not dismissing everything that is published. Not at all. Not at all. I'm just saying that, how you look at research is the way I look at it, and especially when it comes to psychology research, it's really just an observation of of a process,
Right.
and it's
Yeah. I think
quantification of that,
people
and then
want like
yeah,
that one thing that they could be like, this is it definitively, but it's just not how it works. So it's so
no, it
interesting to hear
works.
you say that.
The brain is complex, the brain is noisy, and we still don't know how the brain works. So we cannot make definitive claims about the brain either. Look, even when for instance, let's take neurofeedback interventions, for instance. I'm pretty sure that in these studies, it didn't work for 100% of the participants, right? It worked for a segment of it, 98%, 97%, 95%, for instance. But I think also because our brains are so different. Our brains are really, really different. And for us at Mendi, what our future holds for us, how we see the future is to really, it's personalized brain health. There will never be a time where there's a solution for all people of different walks of life, of different brains. Our brains are very, very different. So we want to, our work for the future is a more personalization, more hyper personalization of the brain training tools that we want to develop for our users. So
That's beautiful.
yeah, so this is yeah, and this is what we're headed. And I'm so excited about it too.
Is there any general themes in neurotechnology or like biotechnologies that you're like 5 to 10 years in the future? Like I'm a huge, like, I love looking at like techno-humanism and like blending technology with the
Yeah.
brain. And like, I don't know how you feel about that kind of stuff. Some people are like, oh, what the heck? But what are your thoughts? Is that a place where we're going? Is that realistic? You got Neuralink, you got stuff outside the brain, you got stuff inside the brain. Like, what is your perspective on the future of neurotechnology and biotechnology?
I think neurotechnology is like with all emerging technologies, right? It's society is behind the curve where technology is sort of ahead of the curve. Also, policy making, the problems that
Yes.
it will give rise to when it comes to privacy, bias, agency. I think, and I think you probably hear this from everyone else, is that AI is going to play a huge role in neurotechnology, for instance. This is something that we have to merge with at some point. And I really do think what I've seen, at least from reading reports and speaking to experts, is there's this brain computer, or like BCI, brain computer interactions, right? Or human robot interactions. I think we start, maybe I wouldn't go as far as Elon Musk and say we will merge with a machine. Not at all. But I think a lot of neurotech is going to be there's a huge trend in monitoring brain activity and be able to interpret that using AI.
Mm.
Basically, be able to decipher the cognitive states of AI. I'm sorry, the cognitive states using AI. But I think it's yeah, what I've seen, the trend at least is headed towards the BCI sphere, at least the brain computer interaction. But for us at Mendi, I'm actually on an advisory board for, I cannot really say that much about the project, but it's on a project by the Nottingham University, um, looking at, yeah, sort of human robot interaction, basically. So it's the sort of social robots, as they call it, for elderly care.
Holy
Because
shit, that
the
is so
world population is becoming, I think by 2050, I think 2 billion people will be over the age of 65.
yes,
The
huge
resources for
problem.
elderly care is, strained as it is. The research is about developing frameworks for how, the frameworks for how to develop these sort of social robots to basically to help
Holy shit.
patients in elderly care, for instance. It's a broader project, but I think I really I mean, I would love to make predictions. I don't think I'm intelligent enough to make these predictions, because I'm also very cautious about, from year to year, things change so fast. I think every time I made a prediction about the future, I was completely wrong. So I think but I really do think that AI is going to play a huge role in neurotech, and it's already playing a massive role. And this is something that we're also looking into to develop at Mendi as well. We want to develop within, because our future for Mendi is not just a device and an app. What we want to see for Mendi, we want to develop a comprehensive brain health platform. And
Yes,
we also work with
nice.
Accenture Labs, for instance, in the UK to bring that to workplaces and to organizations. And the way I see it, and maybe this is just in my head, I would love to see a future where what we want to develop Mendi is to develop sort of a digital twin for you, because
Oh,
this is personalization, because hyper personalization, again, your brain is very, very different. Our brains, we're three different individuals. Our brains are very, very different. Our conditions are very different. And I think having a really hyper personalized experience for brain training, be able to pull the data not only from many devices, but also from your fitness devices, Oura Ring, Polar, or Garmin, or Apple Watch, and be able to develop, to really build a digital phenotype, a digital you, right? That we can train sort of an AI assistant that just gives, based on the data, based on your life, based on who you are and your routines and yourself, let's put it this way, to be able to give you very, very personalized recommendations for, maybe how to sleep better. Maybe we can track your sleeping and see how your hypnogram is getting worse and worse because you're experiencing stress episodes, for instance. And we'll be able to,
dude.
that type of digital tool will be able to give you a type of recommendation based on you, because I really do not see a one size fit all type of solutions. And Chloe, you're a chemical engineer, for instance. It's the same thing, like in the pharmaceuticals, right? It's also headed towards personalization, because, for instance, beta blockers work different on Caucasians versus like African Americans, for instance, because we are different. Our physiology is extremely different. A company like Alta Neuroscience, they are headed towards this precision psychiatry where they collect data from you, like
Yes.
they collect data, physiological data from you over a long period of time to devise a better solution that is unique to you. And I love their approach because, and I love talking about this topic because how we diagnose mental conditions right now, if you have a clinical, I mean, you go to a psychologist, right, or a therapist, and on a Monday, right, and they make an assessment. It's a cross-sectional assessment. This is how you were on a Monday. Cody is not the same person on Monday versus Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right? We are different over the entire week, right? So they are approaching psychiatry from treating every condition as a time series, not a cross-sectional assessment once a
Yes.
week.
Mm.
There
Yeah.
are feedback loops in your environment. There are things, there are triggers in your environment. There are different triggers on Monday versus Tuesday. How you are on Monday is very different the rest of the week, for instance. So really following an individual and be able to collect as much data as possible about their condition over time to make a better informed decision how to tackle this condition, how to tackle this type of, how to devise or to design a therapeutic approach to this. This is what we want to do as well. This is, we want to follow people over a period of time. We collect data. We can understand them because we'll never understand the person from, a 1 hour interaction. We want to see,
Right.
we want to follow this individual over a period of time and develop a better personalized brain health tools.
We got to connect him with the CEO of Gyroscope, Chloe. We interviewed this app that collects like every single bit of information your phone collects on you, your wearables. Like it's the most intense data collection tool I've ever seen in my entire life. It'd be so cool to integrate that with your guys' data. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm very passionate about this as well. And when I work with people in like the trauma space and trauma recovery and mental and emotional health. And I 100 could not agree with you more. I use biometric devices to try and measure their HRV and have objective measurements of their mental health over time. So I could not agree with you more on this. Sadly, we have to come in for a landing here. So we got to transition to our final five here, our final five questions for you. But that was probably one of the coolest future segments we've had on the pod thus far.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
I love that so much. It's hits my literal my purpose is to create a human AI operating system to unite humanity and shift human evolution. Like truly, this is what I want to do. And so it's just so cool to hear like you, someone who studies this so intensely, say that that's like a future that you're like, yeah, me too. So that's awesome.
I think it's inevitable that we need to, I mean, as much as this fear of AI is circulating, I think it's really the next cognitive industrial revolution.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. All right, so let's move into our signature questions. These are 5 questions we ask everybody, and answering them like in a couple sentences is generally the most ideal. Chloe, you want to ask the first one?
Sure. What is one question that you wish people would ask you more?
Sorry.
Take your time.
Okay. It's sorry. It's a very simple question, but oh my God. I think people should ask that more, to be honest. I should ask that more too. And
That's
How are you
beautiful.
doing?
I'm not going to play. Yeah.
So how are you doing?
How are you doing, Doc?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. This has been an incredible conversation. I'm good. I'm good. Yeah.
Heck yeah. It'd be okay if you weren't good. Like we could talk about that too. Just to be clear.
No, it's fine. No, I'm good. Look, it's life has its ups and downs, but I'm grateful for what I have. Some people have it worse.
Beautiful.
So yeah.
I love that. All right, our next question is, what is an important truth that you believe that very few people agree with you on? Peter Thiel question.
Don't treat your convictions as, I would say, hold very loose convictions. Don't stick to everything. Like, yeah, I think so, Adam Grant,
Absolutely.
The guy,
Yes.
exactly.
Organizational
Yeah, who doesn't know who
psychologist.
he
Yeah.
is?
Yeah.
Exactly. I think in his book, Think Again,
Ooh,
he says treat your conviction. Maybe I'm misquoting him, but treat your convictions as loosely held beliefs, right? Open to interpretation, open to new data. I think it's what I've noticed at least, not a lot of people can get over. I mean, I'll struggle with that too, and I'm not gonna, be, sound like some Renaissance person. I'm not. I think a lot, at least from in my circle of friends, it's very not a lot of people can actually agree with that. To really not treat your convictions as, as loose held beliefs and be open to new data coming in and be able to change your mind because the world is moving fast and you cannot held into a conviction from 2 years ago. It's not going to serve you well in the future.
yeah.
I don't know if I've answered that question.
That's a great one.
I think maybe it's in the book or in this. Do you know that show Billions on
Yeah.
HBO?
Yeah. Yeah.
Michael Prince, when he quotes actually Adam Grant from the book. He says basically, Adam Grant said in the book, or maybe he paraphrases him. He said that the future is not going to be run by the smartest, but by those who are willing to take another look one more time. Right. So
Nice.
to really reassess, to be able, basically, don't be stubborn. I think to put it simply, just really be
Yeah.
open to interpretations, to be open to look at something one more time, and
Mm-hmm.
hold your beliefs as loosely as possible, at least.
Yeah, that's a beautiful one, especially in science. I think people forget that even Einstein denied quantum physics until his death. And so it's just like you hear stuff
Yeah,
like that. He's such like one of the smartest humans in the whole world, and now quantum physics is
yeah.
like so that is such great advice for anybody, but especially in this world of science.
Being a scientist is so humbling. It's so humbling.
I bet it
I
is.
can really, it is incredibly humbling. I mean, the times I was wrong, I think I was probably wrong 9 out of 10 times. But it really teaches you to be, yeah, you have to be open to new data, to new way you're looking at things. And we operate by hypotheses and theory. Theories are interpretations and they will change over time. Yeah, just be open-minded. I think that's it helps, it'll serve you well in the future.
Beautiful. All right.
Beautiful. All right. What's a partnership or a connection that would really help you outside of them just giving you money?
Connection outside, sorry again?
So a partnership or a connection that would help Mendi outside
Yeah.
of them just giving you money.
Yeah, I think friendship. I think this is. Are we speaking on the personal level, for instance? Yeah,
Personal
I
Personal
think
level
really.
or as Mendi, either one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, with Mendi, let's take Mendi for instance. One of the joys of working at Mendi is the individuals, the researchers that we work with. Because a lot of research is really hinges on trust, right? And I get to talk to these incredible, intelligent, researchers and building a connection with them. And oh my God, I'm learning so much from them. I left academia years ago. I think every person I work with in research, or research partners, I feel like I have a personal connection with. And I would even go as far as saying it's an enduring friendship, not just, a collaborative relationship. I think I really try to make a friend of the people I work with and everyone I meet. I think friendship is really underrated. There's a lot of people, and I probably see on social media, is like, oh, I don't want to go out. I don't want to, hang out with people. But oh my God, I mean, the neurological benefits of having friends and the social connection is
Like
priceless.
it.
So
It's one of my favorite answers so far to that one.
Yeah, that was a really good answer.
All right, our next one is every single time we have somebody on, we ask our current guest to leave a question for the next guest. So it just so happens that the last guest that we had was the CEO of a company called Raise Health, and they actually analyze people's language and the words that they're saying and help call out mental health issues, right? So they have an AI technology that helps analyze voice stuff. So Craig Mason is the name of the founder. And the question he left for you is, if you could have a billboard in the center of your town to either help people or say something about yourself, what would you have on it? 10 words or less.
A billboard in a town where, what was it again? I could say
Billboard
something
in
about
either
in the center of the
yourself or
town.
something to help somebody in the center of your town, 10 words or less.
Yeah.
What would it say?
Look around, I would say.
Wow.
Really?
What does that
No,
mean to you? What does that mean to
generally
you?
just look. I think look around. It's not to be caught up in your own head too much, or on your phone. Just really look around where you are. I think it's. I mean, I'm guilty of that too. I'm on my phone all the time, and I think people miss a lot when they're not looking around, or at least just. I really don't know how to describe it. It's to be trapped in this, I think someone else described phones as, that this hypodermic needle that we put in everyone's pocket. And I think it's just look around, just don't be, trapped in your own world. I think no human exists in isolation, right? You're not an island. Just look around, just, look at the world around you. I would say that's, and then people, I think it's open-ended, right? People can interpret it in whatever they want to, however they want to, right? Look around to your circle of friends. Look around your city. Look around your life. Whatever it is, I think it's just people need to really look up a little bit.
I love that.
Bam.
Look up for
I love that. I love that. I'm going to put that on my story later. In relation to the question you want to leave now, our final question is the question: what question do you want to leave for the next guest? Without knowing who they are, they're a founder or like somebody who's in the health tech space, but what's the question you want to leave?
I'm gonna have to think about that just a little bit. Can we stop the recording? No. Really try to think. I'm really not good at these things. I would say that. I would say I get a little bit emotional thinking about this because someone else said that to me. I would say to that person, how would you live your life? Or an advice to give someone else that when you're 65, you look back and wonder which part of it actually belongs to you. I think someone close to me said that to me actually when I went to college, sort of advice, because I was, 19 and starting college, my life is all ahead of me. And it's about priorities and about what you want to do and, chase your dreams and everything. But I want to make sure that, how would you live your life? So when you're 65, 75, when everyone at that age thinking about death, obviously, right? You look back, what part of that do you think belongs to you? And that person told me that, live your life in a way that when you look back, you're not wondering which part of it actually belonged to you, which part isn't, chasing a degree, which part isn't chasing a salary, which part isn't chasing an ambition. How would you do that? Because your life is a one-way street. And, you can kick and scream all you want. You're going to get there at some point. So I think it resonates more to me now than before because, I put so much, I worked so much and I, had a burnout and I looking back, I was like, was this worth it?
Yeah.
Which part of the 6 years of a PhD actually belongs to me? And it's no one's fault but my own, really. So it's not pointing finger at someone. It's just because everyone has a choice. No one slapped me on my wrist and told me do this. Anyway, that's what I would say. I mean, I don't know how to phrase it, but I think you get the gist of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. Good work. Cool. Well, we appreciate you hopping on. This has been probably one of the most profound podcasts we've had so far. So I really appreciate you taking some time to hop on with us and share some of your time with us. Look around with us.
Yeah, exactly.
I appreciate that a ton. Is there any place you'd like to point people or anything you'd like to leave them?
Yeah, I would say, take care of yourself. You're at the end of the day, you're just human, really. And when it comes to brain health, you lose your health. I would say when you lose your health, you pretty much lose everything. So I think people should really know that more. This gray hair is a result of not taking care of my health. So
Feel that. Cool. Awesome. Well, appreciate it so much. We'll put a link to Mendi and the website and all that kind of stuff in the show description as
Thank
well.
you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for hopping on with us. If you guys have not liked and subscribed to the Decision Lab yet on YouTube, please do so you get to see more interviews like this. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.